One of my fondest childhood memories is getting my Sega Genesis on Christmas of 1989. I still have my original console, and use it heavily to this day. While I'm a big fan of using original hardware when it comes to games, there's a huge group of people out there that are fans of the system, but no longer have one laying around. Let's be honest here, Sega Genesis game collections are not exactly a revolutionary thing. We're well past the point of being able to keep track of all these compilation releases, with the most recent being the Sega Genesis Classics compilation disc for the Xbox One and PlayStation 4 consoles. I had a chance to take a look at the Xbox One version thanks to a review copy provided by Sega. Let's take a look at some of the previous collections to see how this new one stands up, and how it compares to a real Sega Genesis console. Sega Genesis Classics was developed by D3T Limited. Utilizing a 1990s bedroom as a hub world, you can interact with virtual game cards and a CRT to give a sort of physical interpretation of the built-in emulator used for the games. It's fun, if a little bit low-res looking. Moving around the room gives you a number of options. The game controllers give you surprisingly limited button configurations, and the desk lets you check out achievements, leaderboards, and challenges. The shelf contains the game library, where you can thumb through each of the available 53 games. Game selection-wise, most of these had been released in previous collections, but there are some notables that are brand new to any compilation released in North America. The most exciting of these are Treasure's Run and Gun's Alien Soldier and Gunstar Heroes. On the flip side, there's quite a few omissions that are kind of odd. Of course, Sonic 3 and Sonic & Knuckles are the ones that people will talk about, but back in 2016, Sega got the rights to their Thunder Force series along with all the other Technosoft games. It was a real missed opportunity to include those games in this collection, especially since they were such big parts of the Genesis's early years. Anyway, choosing a game pulls it off the shelf and inserts the cart into the console. From here, it either boots up or you can choose a number of emulator settings. But first, we should understand the resolution of Genesis games and how it's scaled in this compilation to fit your HD TV. Most Sega Genesis games were designed with a resolution of 320 by 224, which was intended to fit within the 4:3 aspect ratio of old CRT televisions. In addition, some games used a 256 wide mode, but it's much less common. Fitting these resolutions into the typical 1080p frame on modern consoles comes with some challenges. In the case of this new collection, the vertical resolution of 224 is multiplied approximately 4.82 times to fill the 1080p space. This results in uneven pixel rows, causing a shimmering effect when the screen scrolls vertically. Most notable with an overhead perspective, like in the Phantasy Star games. By default, the horizontal resolution is forced into the proper 4:3 space, which is all well and good, but again, this causes uneven pixel sizing. However, I found that the horizontal scrolling shimmer is not as noticeable as the vertical shimmer in most games, but it totally depends on your character's movement speed. There is an interesting workaround though. If you go into the emulator settings and choose Stretched Full Screen, then the system completely fills the horizontal space. For games that are rendered at 320 pixels wide, this is a perfect 6x integer scale to 1920, resulting in uniform pixel columns and no horizontal shimmer. But the aspect ratio is a bit of a deal breaker, right? Well, simply change your TV's aspect ratio to 4:3 and voila, problem solved. Although it may look a bit skinny. Note that the stretched full screen trick is not effective for fixing the uneven sizing of games that run at 256 pixels wide. It's really unfortunate that these are still a common issue with emulated classics. The easiest solution is to scale the vertical resolution by an integer. 4 times for 1080p would result in some black bars on the top and bottom, but it's far preferable to a distracting shimmer. This collection also has no 4K support for PS4 Pro or Xbox One X, which is really unfortunate because the 4K resolution is an integer scale of 240p and could have easily solved many of these issues. In the emulator settings, you have a number of pixel scaling options that soften the hard edges of scaled sprites, giving them a smooth, if almost cel-shaded look. If you're into this kind of stuff, it's a nice option to have, but it's worth noting that none of these pixel scaling options can totally eliminate the shimmering effect. If you enjoy the CRT-like scanline look, then there's a toggle for that as well. As of the time of this video, the Xbox One version only allows you to use these in the awkward zoomed out mode, where you see the TV frame. I guess the problem has been patched on the PlayStation 4 version, making them visible in full screen. You can also change the TV projection, which curves the image to feel more like the bubble of a CRT screen. Outside of the actual scaling, the games are emulated pretty well, but there's absolutely some issues that can crop up. It should be noted that these kinds of collections tend to use a single emulator for all the included games. Because of this catch-all approach, it can often result in glitches and weirdness that are difficult to replicate. Creating custom-tailored emulators for each game, such as those used in the Wii Virtual Console, usually results in near-perfect execution. When it comes to the sound department, I found there to be a couple of hiccups that may bother you depending on how closely you pay attention. Most sounds are fairly accurate, although some music did tend to exhibit an odd stuttering and skipping from time to time. The seriousness of this varies from game to game, appearing most heavily in Phantasy Star 3. In contrast, a number of voice samples seem to be cleaned up for some inexplicable reason. Stuff like Ristar's "Come On" when you boot up the game, 2 Axel's "Bare Knuckle" in Streets of Rage 3, everything seems slightly clearer, or maybe it's just different. I'll let you decide which is better. As you'll see throughout this episode, the emulation of the Genesis's Yamaha YM2612 sound chip is oftentimes one of the hardest aspects of the system to get right to this day. Another common sound issue that seems to be cropping up with emulation on newer platforms seems to be that of sound delay, meaning that a sound effect kicks in several frames after an action occurs. Unfortunately, sound delay does crop up in this collection as well. I noticed it, but a good amount of players will not. Speaking of delays, input lag is a huge point of contention when it comes to emulation. It's nearly impossible to work around on modern consoles due to the way that the different technologies work together, so it should be expected to exist at least minimally in all these collections. I'm personally not super susceptible to it, although I can feel it from time to time. That said, I honestly didn't feel any major input lag problems while playing offline. The additional emulator options are fairly robust. Selectable border art is there for people who absolutely cannot handle having parts of the screen unoccupied. I prefer black though, which isn't always an option when it comes to these kind of anthologies, so I was happy to see it. With certain games, you can also choose your region, allowing you to play Japanese versions when it seems more palatable, such as with Streets of Rage 3. I always hated the color changes made for the US. Disabling the sprite limit is nice for games that can be plagued with occasional sprite flicker, such as Gunstar Heroes. It can also cause glitches in certain games, such as the case in the Sonic 1 title screen. But you know, you're unlikely to find many examples where it makes much of a difference in these included games. Mirror mode is a bit of an outside-of-the-box idea for these kind of collections. It flips the entire game, resulting in new challenges for longtime players. A modern convenience is the fast forward and rewind functions. Like, if you didn't get enough rings on the bonus stage of Sonic 2, using the triggers you can rewind time and give it another shot. Alternatively, you can proficiently speed up grinding in one of the included RPGs. Save states are easily created and loaded using the right analog stick, which I felt was much more intuitive and useful than the typical menu implementation. Although it's possible that the rewind feature may make this a bit obsolete, loading a save state is much quicker. Unfortunately, outside of some of the game's specific challenges, there doesn't seem to be much in the way of extra materials. If there are hidden games here, it's certainly not obvious. Finally, for many, the ability to take these games online for multiplayer may just be the deciding factor in purchasing this collection. How does it work? Well, pretty decently depending on the game that you choose. There is substantial input lag when playing this way, along with occasional hiccups, but considering that these games were never meant to be played this way, it's surprisingly functional and fun. It's at its best for slower brawlers like Golden Axe and Streets of Rage 2, where split-second inputs don't exactly mean the difference of life and death. For faster action games like Gunstar Heroes and Monster Lair, familiarity with the game can be the difference of going the distance or a swift death. So, while not perfect, this collection is fairly well done, both in presentation and functionality. There are a lot of ideas here inspired by older compilations, so how does this overall package stand up against those that came before it? Well, I can't look at every single one, but Genesis collections have definitely had some ups and downs to get where they are today. To my knowledge, the earliest compilations of Genesis titles were for the Sega CD, which makes a lot of sense when you think about it. The Sega Classics Arcade Collection was a pack-in disc containing 4 of the best Genesis games: Golden Axe, Streets of Rage, Revenge of Shinobi, and Columns. For the most part, these remain exactly the same as their cartridge counterparts, although there are some minor enhancements such as redone music in the case of Golden Axe and Columns, and new voice samples for Streets of Rage and Golden Axe. Oh, and 2-player mode was removed from Golden Axe for some reason. When the Sega CD Model 2 was launched, this same disc was packed in, but this time with an additional title, Super Monaco GP. On the Sega Saturn, probably the most well-known collection of Genesis titles is Sonic Jam, which rounds up the 4 main Genesis Sonic platforming titles. Unlike your typical compilation, these were full-on ports containing enhancements and optimizations. In Japan, Sega did release additional compilation discs of 16-bit titles, which use emulators to play ROM files off the disc. First was the Phantasy Star collection, which included all 4 of Sega's iconic RPGs. And I Love Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck, a compilation of Castle of Illusion and Quackshot. And while it's fudging the rules just a little bit, I gotta mention the Thunder Force Gold Packs, which are collections of the Mega Drive versions of Thunder Force 2, 3, and 4. It also included Thunder Force AC, which is the arcade version of 3. These are must-haves for fans of the series. Even though these were originally done in-house by Technosoft, Sega owns the rights to these games now, so I'm just gonna go with it. But it was perhaps the release of the Sega Smash Pack Volume 1 on the Dreamcast that brought the idea of Sega Genesis compilation discs to the forefront of the collective gamer consciousness, at least in the console gaming space.
Rise from your grave.
Hoping to spur sales of the Dreamcast with a little nostalgia of the good old days of Sega, the Sega Smash Pack Volume 1 used an emulator developed by Yuki Enterprises and featured 12 games in total, 9 of which were Genesis games. The Dreamcast was one of the first systems to support 480i video output in nearly all games. If not handled correctly, this can be problematic for games that are originally designed for 240p, often resulting in a softer overall look in addition to the flicker normally present in 480i video. Thankfully, this doesn't seem to be the case with the Sega Smash Pack, although we are faced with another problem: severely increased brightness and oversaturation. Additionally, the Sega Smash Pack supports the Dreamcast's ability to output VGA, which can help bring back the defined edges that tend to be lost in the flickering fields of interlaced content. While the brightness and oversaturation persist, the increased clarity reveals a slight dithering in certain colors which affects certain Dreamcast games over VGA. This isn't present in all games, but it's there in the Smash Pack's case. All that aside, the Sega Smash Pack is particularly infamous for its awful emulation, which is actually pretty hilarious in retrospect. Hey, Sonic is on the outside of the banner here too. Dare we even start with the sound? Put bluntly, it's absolutely butchered beyond recognition to the point of being comical. Somehow, this aspect is actually worse than it was in my memory. With the death of the Dreamcast and Sega's exit from the console hardware market, it wasn't too long before we'd see Genesis compilations crop up on other systems. In the USA, we received the Sega Genesis Collection on the PlayStation 2, which consisted of 28 Sega Genesis titles and was developed by Digital Eclipse, who, along with Backbone Entertainment, had their fingerprints all over just about every classic game compilation released in the mid to late 2000s in the US. At a glance, the Sega Genesis Collection appears to be a better overall package than the Sega Smash Pack, despite the odd omission of such games like Revenge of Shinobi and the Streets of Rage trilogy. Although the PlayStation 2 is capable of 240p video, this compilation only offers 480i and 480p video output. Unfortunately, the combination of an improperly scaled pixel aspect and filtering leads to a soft and blurry picture overall. Although you can manipulate your screen size and the options, this issue persists no matter what you do. Outside of the disappointing video quality, the overall emulation fares pretty decently. However, the sound is once again a bit of an issue. For example, Golden Axe incorrectly plays the same voice samples for everything. The Sega Genesis Collection was also released on the PlayStation Portable, and while the actual content remains largely equal between the two, the portable version has quickly selectable screen sizes, making for some interesting uses when coupled with component video output cables. Setting the screen size to original looks pretty decent, if you don't mind the tiny screen size. However, this looks quite amazing on the PSP screen. So while US Genesis fans at least got a decent set of games for the PlayStation 2, it was the Japanese fans who were getting served the real good stuff. Thanks to Japanese developer M2, who are perhaps the absolute best in the world in terms of emulating retro games for newer platforms, we have the de facto standard for all compilations going forward. Among the most relevant to our discussion here are the Space Harrier Collection, Gunstar Heroes Treasure Box, Monster World Complete Collection, and the Phantasy Star Complete Collection. Perhaps most importantly, each title has the capability to output in multiple resolutions: 240p, 480i, 480p, and 480p with scan lines. Based on these available options, you should be able to connect to just about any TV and get a nice image. M2 is very passionate about the Sega Genesis hardware, and it shows in these collections. Compared to the Digital Eclipse collection, the difference is absolutely night and day. Pixel aspect is correct, with no filtering. It looks and feels authentic. And video quality isn't the end of it either. Most games served up in these collections not only include their Japanese releases, but also their international versions. There's a number of variables that can be tweaked to make gameplay better and more accessible. Sprite limits can be increased, and many games even have difficulty adjustments. For example, in the Phantasy Star Complete Collection, lowering the difficulty level increases the amount of experience and money you get from each battle, thus making games like Phantasy Star 2 easier to manage by removing the grind, but not changing the overall difficulty level. Meanwhile, over on the Game Boy Advance was the Phantasy Star Collection, which was developed by Digital Eclipse and contained the first 3 games in the mainline series. Disappointingly, the 4th game was left out for some reason, either due to emulation challenges, time constraints, or some other factor. Direct supervision by Overworks, a Sega development team largely comprised of team members from the original games, certainly helps to add to the authenticity. This collection came together pretty well. Graphical elements like text box sizes were conformed to fit the wider aspect ratio, and everything looks really nice on the GBA screen. Sound is a little odd at times, but I suppose that's to be expected considering the format. there have been numerous re-releases of Sonic's 16-bit titles over the years. The Sonic Mega Collection was handled in-house by Sonic Team for the Nintendo GameCube and later in a Plus version for the PS2 and Xbox. This is the PS2 version here. Not only does this collect the 4 main releases, but also a number of spin-offs like Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine, making for a great package for fans. Although 240p is once again not supported, there is a 480p mode in addition to 480i. In general, it looks pretty good. Still, a 240p rendition would have been preferred overall. By 2006, as the Wii basked in the glow of individual Genesis game releases on the Virtual Console, in 240p I might add, the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 got Sonic's Ultimate Genesis Collection from Backbone Entertainment. This release shared a lot of DNA with the previous Sega Genesis PS2 collection. Featuring 49 games in total, this compilation was by far the most ambitious yet. However, out of these 49 games, 33 are Genesis, and the remaining 16 are comprised of arcade and Sega Master System games. So, does it at least improve the picture quality? Well, yes and no. The games seem to be scaled properly this time, although I cannot be sure it's a perfect integer scale because the entire image seemed to be softened with a bilinear filter, which can conceal the telltale shimmering. For me, the real downside to this collection are the forced borders to the games. Some of these are incredibly gaudy and distracting, and there's absolutely no way to turn them off. The Sega Vintage Collection consisted of a number of downloadable games for Xbox Live Arcade and the PlayStation Network. Early on, this line was handled by Backbone Entertainment, and were overall quite blurry in the visual sense. In 2012, the Vintage Collection was rebooted. With M2 at the helm, who brought a total of 15 classic games consisting of arcade, Master System, and Genesis titles to Xbox Live Arcade and PSN. As expected, these are just fantastic. Screen size options have something for everyone. This is how you do it right, and how you make everyone happy. Oh yeah, did I mention that Monster World 4 is one of the titles offered here? Different regions, customizable controls, and a beautiful soundtrack jukebox. Heck, you can even record gameplay replays or download others' insane replays. I feel that the M2 Vintage Collection is the absolute best way to play these games on modern consoles. My only complaint is that there's no totally black border option, and that more of these weren't released. I wish we could have gotten all these on a physical disc. And last but certainly not least are M2's Sega 3D Classics for the Nintendo 3DS, which took all the usual trimmings of their past endeavors and made them fully 3D and portable. Comprised of mainly arcade games and Genesis titles, although there were a few Master System titles sprinkled in there. If you're a fan of Sega's games, quite simply, these are must-owns. The way the 3D effect looks with the sprite work is really something special. It's arguably the best looking 3D on the system, and that's really saying something. While these were featured primarily in the Nintendo eShop and sold separately, all titles were released across 3 cartridge compilations in Japan. Here in the US, we got 1 volume with 9 games on it. But unfortunately, the rest were never localized, due to what I can assume were poor sales. Next up for M2 are some enhanced Sega releases for the Nintendo Switch. I can't wait to see what they have up their sleeve for those. Over the past 20 years, we've seen Genesis games emulated on so many platforms that it's really staggering. While in my mind, the M2 collections remain the absolute pinnacle of Genesis games on new consoles, this newest compilation provides an excellent entry point for new players to see just what the Genesis was capable of doing. For the price, it's a pretty great deal, and the more people that can play Wonder Boy Monster World, the better.